Hey everyone, tonight we're going to travel far back in time, to a world of mud, smoke, hunger, and stubborn survival. Before we settle in, let's do the usual ritual. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself ease into the rhythm of the story. Think of this as a long, gentle drift into a past that feels at once harsh and strangely familiar. Now, picture yourself as a medieval peasant. It is the year 1315, or perhaps 1348, or any of those terrible years when the rains refuse to stop or the crops refuse to grow. Your name is likely something short, simple, and rugged. Maybe John or Alice, though spelled in strange ways that only a parish priest could really explain. You own perhaps one set of clothing, patched so many times that the original fabric is a mystery. Your feet are calloused, your hands hardened, and your body used to work from before dawn until long after sunset. But tonight, as we walk together through this famine year, you are more than just a name. You are every man and woman who lived through hunger and still found ways to go on. The first thing to understand about a famine year is the dread that hangs in the air even before the hunger begins. Imagine standing in the fields in spring. The earth feels wrong beneath your feet. Too much water, or too little. Seeds rot before they sprout, or they sprout and then wither. The older villagers shake their heads. They've seen bad years before, but this feels worse. You sense it in the silence that falls when the grain fails to push up. No bird songs, no laughter, only muttered prayers and worried glances at the sky. By midsummer, it's clear. The harvest will not be enough. Already you are cutting down weeds, nettles, anything green you can chew. Bread, that symbol of life itself, begins to shrink in your imagination. The loaves are smaller, harder, stretched with ground-up beans, chestnuts, acorns, even clay sometimes. And the smell of bread in the oven, when it happens at all, is rarer, more precious, like incense at a cathedral service. But famine is not just empty stomachs, it is the fear that creeps into every part of your life. You begin to measure your neighbors differently. Who has food hidden away? Who is already desperate enough to steal? A famine year tests the bonds of a village like fire tests iron. Some bonds grow stronger. Families pool their resources, churches open their stores, and a sense of we are in this together carries people through. But other times, suspicion wins. The miller is accused of keeping too much grain, the merchant of selling at cruel prices, and sometimes, strangers wandering into the village are driven away with stones. Let's take a moment and look at what you, as a medieval peasant, could actually do to survive. First, forage. You know your forests and hedgerows better than anyone today knows a supermarket aisle. Wild herbs, berries, nuts, mushrooms, they all go into the pot. And yet, hunger makes you reckless. How many desperate men and women died because they ate something poisonous, mistaking deadly nightshade for a harmless leaf? You cannot always afford caution. Second, preservation. In good years you salted meat, dried fish, smoked hams, stored apples in straw, and hung onions from the rafters. In bad years, you hope those stores last. But rats know hunger too, and they are tireless thieves. Sometimes the rats grow fat while children grow thin, and still you set traps, you guard the grain, you sleep lightly to chase them away in the night. Third, community sharing. Some villages made pacts. We will eat less now, so that we all may eat later. A noble idea, but hunger gnaws at nobility. How easy is it to watch your child cry for food while you hold back for your neighbor's sake? Yet still, in the records, we find signs that people tried. Stories of villagers banding together, of monasteries opening their granaries, of lords distributing what they could. Even in famine, compassion flickered like a candle, refusing to die in the wind. And then there were darker solutions. You hear whispers of families abandoning children, leaving them at monasteries, or simply letting them go. The chronicles speak, in hushed tones, of cannibalism, not widespread, but present, desperate souls in desperate corners of Europe. Hunger pushes human beings to places they never dreamed they could go. But survival was not only about food, it was also about hope, about faith, about finding a reason to live one more day. You go to church, even when your stomach is twisting, and listen to the priest thunder that this famine is God's punishment, or perhaps his test. You kneel anyway, whispering prayers for rain, for sun, for mercy. Faith gives you the strength to endure, even if it does not fill your belly. At night, you huddle with your family in your hut, smoke stinging your eyes from the central hearth. You listen to the wind outside, the wolves howling at the edge of the forest, and you cling to each other. Hunger makes tempers short, but it also makes love fierce. You would give your last crust to your child, your last sip of thin ale to your wife or husband. Hunger does not erase humanity, sometimes it sharpens it, and through it all, the seasons move. Winter comes, cruel and cold, and yet you find ways to endure. A scrap of dried meat, a handful of peas boiled into mush, a rabbit caught in a snare. Somehow, enough to see you through to spring, and when spring finally comes, when the fields turn green again, and seeds push up into the light, you weep with relief. You survived, you endured, and the story of that endurance becomes part of your village's memory, whispered to children so they too will understand the strength hidden inside the weak. So, when we ask how medieval peasants survived a famine year, the answer is not just bread and beans and bitter herbs, it is endurance. It is faith, it is the stubborn refusal to let hunger win, and it is the small kindnesses, the shared crust, the whispered prayer, the fire in the hearth, that carried them through. And tonight, as you drift deeper into this story, maybe you can feel some of that endurance yourself. The knowledge that people before us faced hardships we can barely imagine, and yet they lived, they laughed, they loved, and they carried on. Perhaps that makes your own burdens a little lighter. Perhaps it helps you sleep. As the famine stretches on, the world around you changes in ways both subtle and stark. The village no longer sounds the same. Where once you heard the ring of hammers, the laughter of children, and the lowing of cattle, now the days are marked by silence, broken only by the moan of the wind, or the faint rustle of someone searching for food. It is as if the land itself has fallen quiet, holding its breath, waiting to see who among you will survive. Imagine walking through the village at dawn. Smoke curls from fewer chimneys, because fuel is precious and hard to find. Families huddle together in single rooms, conserving heat and conserving strength. The streets, or perhaps muddy paths, is a better word, are less traveled. Those who can still work in the fields move slowly, conserving energy, their bodies thinner each week. You see faces grow more hollow, shoulders droop, and steps falter. Famine reshapes not only the land, but the people themselves. Yet even in famine, life goes on. The church bell still tolls, calling the faithful to prayer. You gather with your neighbors, each of you gaunt, eyes heavy with fatigue, and kneel together on the cold stone floor. The priest preaches that this trial is part of God's plan. Some believe, some doubt, and some quietly rage inside their hearts. But everyone listens, because to stop listening is to lose the last thread of hope that ties you to something larger than hunger. What about your lords, your rulers, the nobility, who claim dominion over your land? Their experience of famine is different, of course. They have stores of grain, salted meats, wines and cheeses hidden away in their manors. But famine does not spare them entirely. Prices rise, discontent brews, and their power is threatened when their peasants grow too weak or too angry. Some lords distribute food as charity, perhaps out of genuine care, perhaps to prevent rebellion. Others hold fast to their stores, selling at high prices, caring only for profit, and peasants notice. Resentment simmers quietly, sometimes boiling over in acts of defiance, fields left untilled, taxes unpaid, or whispered curses in the dead of night. As the hunger gnaws deeper, your own body begins to betray you. Malnutrition weakens your immune system. A cough lingers longer, a fever burns hotter, a wound festers instead of healing. Diseases find fertile ground in famine years. Typhoid, dysentery, pneumonia. Illnesses that might be survived in times of plenty become deadly now, and famine rarely comes alone. Floods may follow, or war, or plague. Misery compounds misery, a weight pressing down on your weary shoulders, but still people adapt. You learn to stretch every scrap of food. Thin porridge becomes the staple meal. Bread made from barley, rye, oats or whatever can be ground into flour, often adulterated with sawdust, ground up peas, or even powdered bark. The taste is bitter, but it fills the stomach just enough to carry you through another day. Oleek, and watery, is still brewed, for water is often unsafe. You sip it slowly, savoring its faint strength. You also learn the art of distraction. Stories, songs and prayers become more important than ever. In the evening, families gather around the hearth, telling tales of saints, heroes, or mischievous animals. Children's laughter, thin but still bright, breaks through the gloom. Hope lives in these moments. A well-timed joke, a remembered song, a whispered promise that next year will be better. These things sustain the spirit when bread cannot sustain the body. And there are always the small victories. A rabbit caught in a snare, an egg found in the henhouse, a handful of berries discovered in the hedge. Each tiny gift feels enormous, a reminder that the world, though cruel, still offers something. You clutch these moments close, letting them carry you forward. Let us step back for a moment and think about the larger picture. Medieval Europe was not one unified experience. Famine in England was not the same as famine in France, or Germany, or Scandinavia. Climate, soil, politics, all played their part. Some regions endured famines so severe that whole villages vanished. Others managed better, weathering the storm with fewer scars. But everywhere, peasants bore the heaviest burden. They worked the land, they paid the taxes, they endured the hunger, while those above them debated policies and prayed for stability. It is tempting, from the modern world, to imagine medieval peasants as helpless victims. But famine years reveal their resilience. They were resourceful, finding food where others might see only emptiness. They were determined, holding fast to life when giving up might have been easier. They were deeply tied to one another, knowing that survival often depended on community as much as on individual effort. And sometimes, famine years changed history. Revolts sparked in hungry villages. Faith was shaken, trust in rulers eroded, and the old order trembled. The Great Famine of 1315–1317 left scars across Europe, weakening populations just in time for the Black Death to strike a generation later. Hunger shaped politics, religion, and culture in ways that echo through centuries. But for now, let us stay with you, the medieval peasant, trudging through the mud, clutching your stomach, and still searching for something to fill the emptiness. You go to bed with hunger as your companion, lying on straw, pulling a rough blanket over your shoulders. You whisper a prayer, not even sure if it will be heard, but hoping nonetheless. You fall asleep to the sound of rain on the thatch, dreaming of bread, dreaming of meat, dreaming of a future where your children will not know this suffering. And though you may not realize it, those dreams are themselves a form of survival. For famine takes away food, but it also tries to take away hope. As long as you dream, you are still fighting. As long as you hope, you are still alive. So night after night, week after week, season after season, you endure. Not because the food is enough, but because your spirit refuses to break. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of famine years, that survival is not just about filling the belly, but about refusing to surrender the heart. By now, hunger has become more than just an ache in the stomach. It has seeped into your bones, slowed your steps, and dulled your senses. Famine year after famine year teaches you that life is not only a struggle for food, but also a struggle to hold on to dignity when everything around you feels like it is slipping away. You notice the way famine changes relationships. Neighbors who once freely shared tools, seed or bread, now hesitate, calculating what they can spare and what they cannot. Hospitality, once a defining feature of village life, becomes rationed. A guest is welcome, but not too often, not for too long, and not if their appetite is greater than their usefulness. The bonds of community remain, but they are strained. Each act of kindness is a choice that carries a cost. Yet community also proves itself in ways you never expect. When a family is struck by illness and cannot harvest, others step in, not because they can afford it, but because they know the same could happen to them. You help one another, because in famine, survival is not about standing alone, it is about standing together. That delicate balance between self-preservation and solidarity defines the rhythm of village life. The seasons pass differently now. Spring, which once brought joy and renewal, becomes a season of dread if stores are already depleted. Fields must be ploughed and sown, but without strength, without seed, without hope, it is an impossible task. Summer brings long days of work, but the crops may fail again if the rains are too heavy or the sun too weak. Autumn, usually a time of harvest celebration, can instead be a season of despair when yields fall short. And winter is the cruelest of all. It is the season when famine bares its teeth, when stores are gone, when the land lies silent and unyielding. Each season becomes not a chapter in a cycle of life, but a reminder of uncertainty. In the village, rumors travel faster than the wind. Some say that neighboring towns are faring better, that bread can be found just a few miles away. Others whisper of lords hoarding grain in distant castles, feeding their dogs more lavishly than peasants feed their children. Tales of merchants charging impossible prices stir anger, but anger does not fill the stomach. These whispers bring no food, only frustration and bitterness. Still, stories matter. They become part of the shared language of survival, part of the way people explain their suffering and make sense of it. And then there are the outsiders, beggars, travelers, those who wander from place to place seeking scraps. Some are welcomed, others are driven off with curses or stones. The line between peasant and beggar is thin in famine years.
One bad harvest, one illness, one cruel winter, and anyone could find themselves cast adrift, forced to leave their home in search of sustenance. You look at the strangers, with a mixture of pity and fear, wondering if you will someday be one of them. Religion offers both solace and conflict. Priests urge you to see famine as a test of faith, a punishment for sin, or a reminder of the fleeting nature of earthly life. Pilgrimages are organized, processions wind through the village, prayers rise into the sky. People cling to these rituals because they offer the illusion of control, the hope that divine mercy might yet intervene. But there are also doubts, quiet questions whispered at night. If God is merciful, why must children starve? If the saints are listening, why does relief not come? Famine tests not only the body but the soul, shaking the foundations of belief. Meanwhile, survival strategies grow more desperate. Peasants scour the fields for nettles, dandelions, and wild herbs. They peel bark from trees, grind it into powder, and mix it with flour. They boil grass into thin soup, chew on roots, and sometimes eat food that would normally be fed only to animals. Hunger makes you creative, but it also makes you reckless. Some plants are poisonous, some mixtures deadly. A bitter taste in the mouth can mean another day of life, or the end of it. Even so, there are small moments of joy. A sudden patch of mushrooms, discovered in the forest, a bird trapped in a snare, a gift of cheese from a distant cousin. These rare treats feel like feasts, like celebrations in the middle of despair. They remind you that famine does not erase life entirely. It only reshapes it into something harsher, something sharper, something that requires you to treasure every small mercy. The children suffer most visibly. Their cheeks grow hollow, their bellies swell with malnutrition, their laughter fades into quiet whimpers. Parents go hungry, so their children can eat. But even these sacrifices are not always enough. Families grieve silently, burying their young in shallow graves, hoping that the soil will be kinder to them than life has been. And yet, some children survive, toughened by hunger, hardened by suffering, carrying forward the resilience of their families. You notice too, how famine changes time itself. Days blur together, marked not by events or seasons, but by the gnawing in your belly. Memory becomes sharper, for moments of eating, and duller for everything else. You measure your life in meals, in scraps, in handfuls of grain, in sips of thin broth. Time is no longer counted by festivals or harvests, but by how long you can endure without breaking. And still, you endure, because endurance is the most powerful act of defiance against famine. To wake each morning, to put one foot in front of the other, to coax another seed into the soil, to whisper another prayer. These are victories, small but profound. Looking around, you realize that famine is not only about starvation, it is about transformation. The land changes, the people change, even your own spirit changes. You are no longer who you were before the famine began. Hunger has etched lines into your face, carved discipline into your habits, and forced you to see the fragility of life more clearly than ever before. But it has also revealed strength you did not know you had, resilience that runs deeper than the roots of the oldest oak in the forest. So you continue, not because survival is certain, but because it is possible, and in famine years, possibility is enough. By now, you have learned that famine is not only a physical condition, but a social one. Hunger reshapes the village hierarchy in ways you never expected. Those who manage to secure food, perhaps through trade, cunning, or hidden stores, gain influence. A family that still has grain can bargain for labor, loyalty, or protection. Others, desperate to survive, may indenture themselves, offering years of service in exchange for a few loaves of bread. In this way, famine becomes a force that redraws lines of power in the village. But hunger also exposes the cracks in authority. The lord who was once feared and respected may now be whispered about in tones of resentment. If he shares his grain, he is praised, but if he hoards it, he becomes the villain of every fireside story. The priest, too, walks a fragile path. His sermons must inspire hope, but if they lean too heavily on patience and suffering, villagers begin to murmur that he speaks only for the rich. In famine years, the very institutions meant to hold society together tremble under the weight of doubt and anger. Conflict simmers. Famine breeds tension, not only between classes, but also within them. Neighbors quarrel over boundaries, over scraps of food, over accusations of theft. A missing chicken, a stolen turnip, or a loaf gone from a storeroom can spark disputes that in better times would have been settled with a shrug. Now, every loss feels like a threat to survival, and tempers ignite quickly. Fights break out in the fields, curses fly in the marketplace, and grudges linger longer than usual. Hunger sharpens suspicion until even long friendships strain. At the same time, famine creates unlikely alliances. Families that once kept to themselves may begin sharing meals, pooling resources, or working each other's land. A widow might be taken in by distant relatives, a beggar boy given a place near the fire in exchange for chores. Survival requires cooperation as much as it requires competition. In famine, the village becomes a shifting web of fragile alliances, constantly forming and dissolving in response to need. The role of women becomes especially vital. While men may struggle in the fields or travel in search of work, women manage the household economy with razor-sharp precision. Every crumb is counted, every scrap of fabric mended, every herb in the garden tended with care. Mothers sacrifice portions of their own meals for their children. Daughters take on heavier labor, gathering fuel, hauling water, nursing the sick. Women carry much of the invisible burden of famine, their endurance often the difference between survival and despair. And through it all, culture persists. Even in the hardest years, traditions are not abandoned entirely. Festivals may be smaller, feasts replaced with thin broth, but the songs are still sung, the prayers still whispered, the rituals still observed. These customs remind people of who they are, connecting them to ancestors who also endured hardship. In famine, tradition becomes more than celebration, it becomes defiance. To sing when your stomach is empty is to declare that hunger has not taken everything from you. The natural world also takes on new meaning. Fields that once symbolized plenty now represent both failure and possibility. Forests become hunting grounds, hedgerows potential sources of wild herbs, rivers places to catch eels or fish. You look at the land differently, scanning every corner for sustenance. Even the stars in the night sky feel changed, distant watchers of your suffering, indifferent but constant. Some find comfort in this constancy, others feel mocked by it. The church, too, adapts. New prayers are written, special masses held, pilgrimages urged, saints associated with fertility, harvest and rain become especially popular. Stories spread of miracles in distant villages, statues weeping, relics healing the sick, apparitions promising relief. Whether true or not, these tales circulate quickly, feeding hope as much as bread once did. People cling to them, because in famine, hope is a form of nourishment. Yet, famine also inspires darker practices. Accusations of witchcraft rise. Desperate for explanations, people blame those on the margins. The old woman who lives alone, the healer whose remedies failed, the outsider who arrived just before the crops withered. Fear searches for scapegoats, and sometimes it finds them. In the absence of food, suspicion becomes a dangerous currency, traded in whispers that can end in violence. Politics plays its part as well. Kings and princes may attempt to control grain prices, to ban exports, or to enforce rationing. Sometimes these measures help, sometimes they worsen the suffering. Peasants rarely see the full scope of such decisions, but they feel the effects. Higher taxes, stricter laws, harsher punishments, all reminders that famine weakens not only bodies, but also freedoms. Hunger becomes a tool of control as much as a natural disaster. And yet within the bleakness, there are moments that remind you of humanity's stubborn resilience. A stranger shares half of their crust with you. A neighbor carries your tools when you are too weak. A child finds laughter in the simplest of games, their joy cutting through the gloom like a candle in the dark. These small mercies do not erase the famine, but they make it bearable. They keep the spirit alive. From the outside, centuries later, historians can measure famines in terms of mortality, crop failure, and political upheaval. But to live through one is different. It is not numbers on a page, but the daily struggle of holding on, of finding ways to carry hunger without letting it consume you entirely. Each day is a negotiation with despair. Each night is a prayer for survival. And through it all you endure, not as a number, not as a statistic, but as a human being, fiercely clinging to life even when the odds are stacked against you. The famine may strip away food, wealth and even faith, but it cannot strip away the will to survive. That above all else defines you.
By the fifth year of hardship, or even just the fifth season, you begin to realize how famine leaves marks that linger long after the hunger fades. It is not just the body that remembers, but the mind, the community, and even the land itself. Survival is never a return to normal, but an adjustment to a new kind of existence. Children who grow up in famine years carry the scars for life. Malnutrition stunts their growth, weakens their bones, and leaves them more vulnerable to illness. Even if food returns in abundance, their bodies will never fully catch up. And beyond the physical, there is the memory of hunger itself. A child who once cried through long nights on an empty stomach learns to hoard, to fear scarcity, to look at abundance with suspicion. Generations later, stories of hunger are still told, shaping habits and traditions. Bread is never wasted. Food is always valued. Hunger becomes part of cultural memory. For adults, famine hardens the spirit, but also bends it. Some emerge with renewed determination, vowing never again to be caught unprepared. They hide away grain, they build stronger ties with neighbors, they learn every edible plant in the forest. Others are broken by the experience. They carry bitterness, mistrust, and a sense of betrayal toward lords, priests, and even God. Famine is not an event, it is a turning point, and everyone who lives through it comes out changed. The land, too, remembers. Exhausted soil takes years to recover. Fields left unplanted grow wild. Orchards neglected during hard years wither, their fruit trees producing less than before. Hunger does not vanish overnight, just because the rains return or the sun shines. The scars of famine remain etched in the countryside, visible in ruined farms, abandoned villages, and fields reclaimed by forest. And yet, famine years also teach adaptation. Villages become more cautious, more inventive. Crop rotation is practiced with greater care, food preservation methods refined, and communities build larger granaries if they can. Families diversify their diets, planting gardens with herbs, beans, or hardy greens. Some even take to raising bees or small animals in secret, tucked away to ensure a little protein when crops fail again. Knowledge is passed down, whispered from elder to child, so that when hunger returns, as it inevitably will, the next generation will be better prepared. On a personal level, famine makes you think differently about time. The future is no longer a vague hope, but a fragile possibility you must actively defend. Each seed planted, each loaf baked, each favor traded, is an investment in survival, not just for today, but for the seasons to come. You learn to live with constant calculation. If you eat too much now, will you have enough for tomorrow? If you share with a neighbor, will they remember your kindness when you are in need? Every decision carries weight. The social order continues to shift in famine years. Some peasants manage to rise slightly, securing more land or favorable arrangements by seizing opportunities when others falter. A family that hoarded wisely, or that had strong ties to wealthier patrons, may come out ahead. Others sink into deeper poverty, selling possessions, taking on debt, or even entering into servitude just to stay alive. Hunger is a leveler in some ways, but in others it is a sharp divider, marking out those who can bend without breaking from those who are crushed entirely. Trade routes and towns also play a role. If your village lies near a market town, you may have access to imported grain, dried fish, or salted meat, though at a cost many cannot afford. Merchants, like lords, walk a fine line between providing a lifeline and exploiting desperation. Some grow wealthy in famine years, buying low and selling high, while others face wrath if accused of profiteering. For the peasant, such markets are both salvation and source of resentment, places where survival is purchased at the price of dignity. Beyond the practical, famine also inspires art, stories and folklore, tales of saints multiplying bread, of animals guiding starving families to food, of strange lights in the sky heralding the end of hunger. These stories circulate, giving shape to fear and hope alike. Even songs change, filled with laments and prayers, carrying the weight of suffering through melody. Centuries later, historians will study these cultural traces, seeing famine not just as a crisis but as a moment that reshaped imagination itself. And let us not forget the ever-present specter of death. In famine years, mortality rises. Graves multiply, cemeteries fill, and mourning becomes part of daily life. But death in famine carries a particular cruelty. It is not swift like battle, nor sudden like plague. It is slow, lingering, stretching out over weeks or months. The faces of the dying are all around you, a constant reminder of your own fragility. And yet, life insists on continuing beside death. Children are still born, marriages still take place, and laughter still occasionally rings out, however faintly. This juxtaposition, the closeness of despair and joy, is part of what defines famine life. Looking outward, famine can also spark larger movements. Hungry villages may rise up, refusing taxes, storming granaries, or attacking merchant caravans. These acts of desperation are dangerous, but they are also expressions of agency. To steal a loaf of bread in a famine year is not just theft, it is rebellion against a system that allowed hunger to fester. Sometimes these revolts succeed, forcing lords to concede grain or lower taxes. More often, they are crushed, leaving scars of violence on top of scars of hunger. But even failed revolts leave echoes, shaping how rulers treat their people in the future. For you, the peasant, famine becomes the defining rhythm of life. You wake each day with hunger as your first thought, work each field with hope as your only tool, and go to bed each night, uncertain if tomorrow will bring relief or ruin. And still, somehow, you endure. You endure because you must, because the land, harsh though it is, still offers something if you search long enough, because your family needs you, because your very existence is an act of resistance against the silence that famine tries to impose. By now, you realize that famine is not a story of despair, but of persistence. It is the tale of peasants who, against all odds, refused to vanish, of communities that clung together when the world seemed to collapse, of ordinary people who turned suffering into lessons, lessons into traditions, and traditions into survival. Hunger is cruel, but it is not victorious. Life, fragile though it may be, always finds a way to continue. As famine grinds on, you begin to see how it touches not only the body and the village, but the very meaning of life itself. When food is scarce, every choice feels like a moral test. Do you share your last loaf with a neighbor, or save it for your own children? Do you trust in God's mercy, or turn to desperate acts that you once would have condemned? Hunger is not only about what goes into the stomach, it is about what kind of person you become when the world offers you nothing but emptiness. The hunger sharpens your senses. You notice the faintest smell of bread drifting from a distant house, the sound of a chicken clucking in a neighbor's yard, the sight of edible weeds peeking through the mud. Your whole body becomes attuned to survival, as if evolution itself whispers instructions: look there, dig here, wait for the chance. And yet, you also grow numb in other ways. Emotions dull, laughter feels distant, memories blur into one another. It is as if famine strips you down to your most basic instincts, demanding you forget who you once were in order to survive who you must become. The rhythms of work continue, though slower, weaker. Fields must be tended even in famine years. A sickle swings, a plow drags, seeds scatter, your muscles ache, but you force them to move. Because the only way out of famine is through it. And sometimes, against all odds, the earth responds. A patch of barley pushes through the soil, stronger than expected. A row of beans climbs higher, greener. You feel hope flicker, fragile, but real. Each time a plant survives the cruelty of the season, hope, in famine, often looks like a single green shoot in a field of brown. Your relationships change in subtle ways. Families draw closer, bound together by necessity, but they also fracture under the strain. Arguments flare more easily, patience runs thinner, tempers sharpen. Hunger gnaws not only at the stomach, but at love itself. Still, bonds endure, because breaking them entirely means facing famine alone, and no one survives alone. Even strained love is better than none at all. Religion continues to play its role, sometimes comforting, sometimes haunting. You walk to the church on a Sunday morning, feet dragging, body weak. The stone walls are cool, the candles flicker, the priest speaks of heaven where there will be no hunger. The words soothe some, but others feel hollow inside. You wonder if heaven will ever come, or if it is only a story told to keep peasants quiet in their suffering. Yet, when the congregation sings together, voices rising in thin but steady harmony, something within you stirs. Perhaps it is not belief in miracles, but belief in each other that keeps you moving. Beyond the village, rumors of better lands grow louder. Some peasants speak of leaving, of traveling to places where famine has not struck, where lords are kinder or fields more fertile. For most, leaving is unthinkable. The village is not just home but identity, ancestry, and belonging. To abandon it is to cut yourself from your roots. But a few do go. They shoulder what little they have and walk away, their backs growing smaller against the horizon. Whether they find abundance or perish on the road, you may never know. Their departure is both an act of hope and an act of desperation. The children who remain learn lessons no parent would wish to teach. They learn how to recognize edible herbs, how to portion out a meal, how to ignore hunger pangs until sleep comes. They grow up quickly, skipping the carefree days of childhood. Their games mimic adult struggles, pretend farming, pretend begging, pretend feasting. Even play is reshaped by famine, a shadow cast across imagination itself. In famine, even nature feels hostile. Storm clouds that once promised rain, now bring dread of flooding. Sunlight that once warmed now scorches the earth. The forest, once a source of wood and game, feels emptied of its generosity. Animals grow scarce, plants wither.
rivers thin. It is as if the world itself has turned its face from you. And yet, sometimes, it surprises you with mercy. A cluster of berries hanging where you least expect, a fish wriggling in the stream, a deer straying too close to the edge of the trees. These gifts feel miraculous, reminders that nature takes but also gives. Even in famine, the body pays the steepest price. Your muscles shrink, your skin loosens, your teeth ache. You rise each morning, with stiffness, dizziness, and fatigue. Illness lingers longer, wounds close slower. And yet, you keep moving, because stillness feels like surrender. Your body weakens, but your will grows iron strong. Hunger tries to bend you, but it does not break you. Villagers turn to barter more than ever, with coin scarce and food priceless. Trade takes strange forms. A tool sharpened, in exchange for a bowl of porridge. A night of labor in return for a piece of cloth. A secret recipe, traded for a sack of beans. Everything becomes currency. Even stories, songs and prayers hold value, because they ease the weight of suffering. In famine, survival is not only about what you have, but about what you can offer. As weeks turn to months, the famine year becomes part of your very identity. You no longer say, last spring or this autumn. You say, the year of hunger. Memory bends around it, measuring all other events against its bleak standard. Births, deaths, marriages, everything is marked as before the famine, or after the famine. It becomes the dividing line of your life. And yet, famine also teaches gratitude in the harshest possible way. A piece of bread becomes a treasure. A bowl of warm soup feels like a feast. A smile from a neighbor feels like sunlight breaking through the clouds. You learn to see abundance in what once seemed ordinary, to cherish what once was overlooked. In a strange and painful way, famine sharpens your appreciation for life itself, because you see more clearly than ever how fragile it is. As night falls on another day of hunger, you sit by the dim glow of the hearth. Your stomach grumbles, your body aches, but you are still here. You survived another day. You close your eyes, whisper a prayer, and let sleep take you, carrying you into dreams where fields are full, tables heavy with food, and laughter rises freely. Dreams that may never come true, but which sustain you nonetheless. The famine year grinds forward, and though every day feels heavy, you begin to notice how survival itself becomes a rhythm. Hunger is the backdrop, the constant note in the song of your life, but against it you build a melody of persistence. Each morning begins the same. You rise slowly, joints stiff, the air colder than you remembered. Your breath a mist in the dim light. The first thought is always food. What can be gathered? What can be stretched? What can be spared? The hunger is not just in your stomach, it is in your mind, shaping every decision. In these hard months, communities lean into traditions that connect them to something larger than their own struggle. Feast days are still observed, though the feasting is symbolic. Where once a table might have held roasted meat, rich breads, and flagons of ale, now it holds a thin pottage, a shared loaf, and cups of watered-down cider. The portions are small, but the ritual matters. Lighting candles, saying prayers, telling old stories, it all serves to remind people that famine cannot erase identity. Even when food is scarce, meaning must remain abundant. Old songs rise in the evenings. By the fire, voices sing not of plenty, but of endurance. Folk tales of clever peasants who outwitted hunger, of saints who turned stones into bread, of ancestors who survived worse. These stories do more than pass the time, they give shape to suffering, reminding listeners that famine is not the end of the story, only a chapter. You feel the power of words in these moments, how they nourish the spirit when the body is starving. The landscape changes as the year wears on. Trees grow bare, fields grow brittle, and the village itself feels quieter, slower. Even the animals seem subdued. Chickens peck half-heartedly, cows grow thin, dogs wander restlessly. You walk paths you've walked your whole life, but now they feel different, emptier, lonelier. Hunger transforms not only people, but places, painting everything in muted tones. Yet famine also reshapes time itself. Days stretch long, but months slip quickly. You cannot remember exactly when the hunger began, only that it has lasted too long. Seasons blur together. Was it winter when the bread ran out, or spring when the stores grew bare? The famine becomes timeless, erasing the usual markers. Only hunger remains constant, the measure of each passing day. The authorities, too, cast their shadow over the year of scarcity. Tax collectors still arrive, though what they take is less. For even lords cannot demand what peasants no longer have. Sometimes they take goods instead of coin, wool, tools, even furniture. Each visit feels like a theft, yet resistance is dangerous. The Lord's needs are explained as divine right, as though God himself has decreed that the poor must surrender to the wealthy. Bitterness grows in whispers, but few dare to speak too loudly. Famine is cruel, but power is crueler. Still, not all gestures from above are harsh. Occasionally, a lord will open his stores to distribute grain, or the church will provide alms. These moments feel like salvation, though they are often brief. The handful of flour you carry home is precious, guarded as though it were gold. Every grain matters, every crumb is accounted for, and even though the gift is not enough to erase hunger, it is enough to keep you alive a little longer. Desperation drives innovation. Peasants learn to make flour from acorns, chestnuts, and even bark. Bread baked from such mixtures is coarse and bitter, but it fills the belly. You boil roots until they soften into mush, roast weeds until they taste almost like vegetables, grind dried nettles into powder. None of it is satisfying, yet it is food, and food means survival. You learn in famine that taste is a luxury. The goal is not pleasure, but endurance. At night, dreams are heavy with food. You dream of stews bubbling with meat, loaves of bread warm from the oven, pies filled with apples, pears and honey. The dreams are so vivid that waking feels like a second loss, hunger doubled by disappointment. Some villagers say dreams of food are blessings, others say they are curses. For you they are simply reminders of what life could be, what life once was, and what you hope it might be again. Children, more than anyone, bear the visible marks of the famine. Their faces grow gaunt, their movements slower, their eyes larger in their thin cheeks, yet they still find ways to laugh. A game with stones, a chase through the village lanes, a song sung off-key, they cling to joy, even if only for a moment. Adults watch them with a mixture of sorrow and awe. The resilience of children is both heartbreaking and inspiring. They remind you that even famine cannot smother all sparks of life. But famine also deepens divisions. Those who have more guard it carefully, sometimes jealously. Resentment brews when one family seems better fed than another, when rumors spread that someone is hoarding or cheating. Trust frays at the edges, suspicion sharpens. It is easy, in famine, to see enemies where once there were friends. Yet, moments of generosity shine brighter against this darkness. A neighbor sharing a crust of bread, a friend offering a blanket, a stranger whispering where wild onions can be found. These acts of kindness feel larger than they are, as though they prove humanity itself survives even in hunger. The cycle of prayer continues, but the prayers grow heavier. Give us this day our daily bread, feels less like ritual and more like plea. The church bells still toll, but their sound seems slower, almost mournful, and yet, people gather, because gathering is a defiance of despair. Togetherness is a form of survival, even when the body is weak. Alone, hunger crushes. Together, hunger is endured. Each day of famine teaches the same lesson. Life clings stubbornly to itself. The human body bends but does not break. The human spirit flickers but does not go out. And though you do not know when this famine will end, you know that one day, it must. For no hunger lasts forever, even if it feels endless in the moment. The memory of past famine years whispers proof of this. Others survived, and so can you, and so you endure. You wake, you search, you eat what little there is, you work with what strength remains, and you rest, ready to do it all again tomorrow. It is not glorious, it is not easy, but it is survival. And in famine, survival is victory enough. The famine year stretches into late months, and though the days feel endless, you have survived long enough to see the cycle begin to turn again. Fields that lay barren now show faint signs of recovery. A green haze spreads over the soil, where winter wheat pushes through, stubborn and slow. It is not enough to feed you yet, but it is a promise, a whisper from the earth that hunger is not eternal. But promises do not fill bellies. Until harvest comes, the struggle remains relentless. Villagers continue to stretch rations thinner, finding ways to make a single loaf last longer, to water down pottage, until it becomes more soup than meat. You eat not to be satisfied, but to continue brewing. Hunger teaches you that survival is not about fullness, it is about endurance. The famine marks every face, every body. Some have grown gaunt, eyes deep set, cheeks hollow. Others carry swollen bellies from malnutrition, legs too thin to carry their weight. The elderly stumble more often, their strength eroded by weeks without proper food. Graves in the churchyard multiply, though no one speaks of numbers. Each burial is felt, but none is counted, as though admitting the scale of loss would crush what little spirit remains. Still the village breathes together. When someone dies, others gather, even with weak bodies and tired hearts. They carry the coffin, sing the hymns, and place the body into the earth. Hunger may claim flesh, but it cannot take ritual. These acts of farewell are small defiance against despair, affirmations that even in famine, humanity endures. Rumors of relief spread like sparks on dry straw. Some say a neighboring lord has opened his stores, others that a distant monastery is giving out bread to travelers. These whispers stir both hope and risk. A few villages leave, walking for days in search of aid, while others stay, fearing the journey would waste the last of their strength. Every rumor is a choice. Do you gamble on hope beyond the horizon, or cling to survival where you stand? The children grow quieter as the months pass. Their games are fewer, their laughter rarer. Some sit in doorways, listless, watching the world with eyes too serious for their age. Yet sometimes, a burst of energy surprises you. A group chasing one another, a child singing, a little one dancing clumsily to a tune hummed by her mother. These moments feel like tiny miracles, proof that life resists even in its weakest state. The lord of the land walks a delicate line. On some days, his men distribute small amounts of grain, a gesture that keeps peasants loyal and alive just enough to work the fields when they recover. On other days, his demands seem cruelly indifferent, insisting on rent or labor, no matter the famine's grip. Resentment simmers beneath the surface, yet fear keeps it unspoken. The balance between power and survival is fragile, and every peasant knows rebellion against hunger is dangerous, but rebellion against lords is deadly. The church plays its role too. Priests preach patience, prayer, and penance. Some claim famine is punishment for sin, a test of humility. Others speak of heaven, promising endless feasts beyond this life. Whether these words comfort or anger depends on the listener. For some, faith is the only nourishment left. For others, it feels like salt in the wound. But even the skeptics come to church, because in famine, being together matters more than believing the same. As months grind on, you learn to see beauty in survival itself. A bowl of nettle soup, bitter though it is, feels like a blessing. A crumb of bread left on the tongue feels like a luxury. A kind word from a neighbor carries more weight than God. Famine reshapes value, teaching you that the smallest mercies are priceless. Yet famine also deepens shadows. Theft becomes more common. Tools, scraps of food, even clothes disappear. Accusations fly. Suspicion poisons relationships. Fear of hunger drives people to acts they never imagined. But amid the darkness, acts of generosity glow brighter. A mother splitting her loaf 3 ways. A father giving his portion to a child. A friend sharing herbs found in the forest. In famine, cruelty and kindness live side by side, both born of desperation. The body grows used to hunger. In a strange way, the sharp pangs dull into constant ache. A background hum of emptiness. You learn to ignore it, to move slowly, to pace your strength. Tasks that once took an hour, now take a day, but they are done. You live not in bursts of energy, but in careful conservation. Life shrinks, but it continues, and always, there is hope for the harvest. Every sprout in the field is watched with desperate eyes. Every bud in the hedgerow studied for signs of fruit. Villagers speak of the future in cautious tones, never daring to believe too strongly. Yet the thought of grain ripening, of ovens filled with bread, of tables holding more than scraps, it fuels endurance, giving shape to the months ahead. Evenings remain the time of stories. Around fires, people recount tales of ancestors who endured past famines, who lived to see years of plenty. Some tales are embellished, others remembered with painful accuracy, but all serve the same purpose: to remind the living that famine does not last forever. The act of telling stories itself is a rebellion against silence, against despair. Words become food for the spirit, filling gaps that hunger leaves. At night, sleep is both a blessing and a thief. Dreams of food are vivid, so real you can taste the bread, smell the stew, hear the crackle of roasting meat. Waking feels cruel, as though life itself has stolen from you. But even so, dreams give the body rest, and rest is a kind of nourishment in itself. You rise weaker, but also ready to face another day, because you must. The famine year is now part of you, etched into your bones, written in your memories. You know you will carry it always, no matter how many years pass. It will be the year you tell your children about, the year that shaped you, the year that proved your strength. And though the suffering is sharp, the endurance is sharper. You are still here, you are still alive. And that in famine is victory. The famine year draws toward its close, and though hunger still lingers, signs of change begin to whisper through the land. The days grow longer, the air warmer, and the soil begins to loosen its grip. Shoots of grain sway in the breeze, promising a harvest that might finally end the relentless ache in every belly. For months you have lived in survival mode, but now you begin to dream of something greater: recovery, renewal, even joy. The first fruits of the hedgerows arrive, tentative but real. Berries cluster on thorny branches, tart and small but bursting with flavor after months of bland survival foods. Children run to gather them, hands stained red and purple, laughter returning in brief, precious bursts. Mothers scold gently, but secretly smile, relieved to hear joy in their children's voices again. These fruits do not end the famine, but they remind you that nature's cycle is not broken, it is only slow. The village, too, begins to stir with new energy. Weary though you are, you sense the collective lift of spirits. Hope spreads faster than despair ever did. Where once the lanes echoed with silence, now they hum with cautious chatter. People plan for the harvest, speak of the next year, imagine a life beyond hunger. It is fragile hope, easily broken if crops fail, but it is hope nonetheless, and hope is food for the soul. As the fields ripen, the labor begins. Sickles flash in the sunlight, bending wheat into neat bundles. Even the weakest join in, for the harvest is more than work, it is salvation. Children carry sheaves, women bind them, men stack them high. Every grain feels like treasure, guarded fiercely against waste or theft. You feel the rhythm of life return, the old cycle of planting and gathering restored after famine, nearly unraveled it. Doubters still kneel side by side in the church, united by shared survival, if not shared certainty. Famine may divide belief, but it also unites experience. In quiet moments, you reflect on what famine has taught. Endurance, certainly, gratitude, undeniably, but also humility, the knowledge that life is fragile, that abundance is not a right, but a fleeting gift. You see the strength in your neighbors, the resilience in your children, the stubborn will to live that carried you all through the darkest months. And you realize that famine, though cruel, has revealed something powerful, the capacity to endure more than you ever thought possible. As the year turns and hunger finally loosens its hold, you step into a future that feels uncertain, but alive with possibility. You know famine can return. History teaches that it often does. But you also know you have survived once, and that knowledge is a shield. The famine year will always haunt you, but it will also strengthen you. For in surviving famine, you have discovered not only the fragility of life, but also its fierce unyielding will. And so as bread rises again in ovens, as fields turn golden under the sun, as laughter drifts once more through the village lanes, you breathe deeply. You survived. Your people survived. And survival, in the end, is the greatest story of all.